This from Jake on Blue Sky. With Paulo Fonseca being given a 9-month ban for squaring up to a referee, where do Lyon go from here? They're in a hole, aren't they, Andy?
9, I think you mean 9 N-I-N-E, to make absolutely clear. It's one of those on the video printer,
rather
isn't
than
it?
N-E-I-N.
Yeah.
9.
I think it's a huge ban. It's a huge ban. Now, look, we've got to start off and say what Fonseca did was just completely unacceptable. Benoit Milo, the referee, I think dealt with it really, really well at the time. But bad as it was from Fonseca, the ban does seem a bit disproportionate. I think he didn't hit him, which I know that sounds ridiculous, but there was no actual physical act of violence before. Effectively, he just shouted in his face, and it was, I guess, a sort of grievance that he'd been harbouring over the game. It was clear because he was booked in the first half, and Fonseca was clearly very on edge. I mean, in the end, what he ended up tearing out the referee for was potentially given a penalty against Lyon via VAR, which he didn't. So it was a bit ridiculous. But we've seen Fonseca. He's got a reputation of being very poised and calm. But remember, in his last game for Milan, he was sent off for arguing with the referee quite vociferously against Roma as well. Obviously, he knew at that point that he was just about to be fired. But still, normally, I think you look at clubs who are not happy with a decision like this in the position which Lyon are in, and they've said they're going to appeal. I would imagine their appeal to the FFF, the French Federation, won't do anything. But the appeal to like the French equivalent of CAS, the highest sporting authority, maybe they'll get some time nicked off. I actually agree with some of the Lyon statement where they talk about how Fonseca is basically paying for the context in which this happened. Because, you know, we spoke recently about Pablo Longoria. We spoke about that on last week's Ask, and how he was banned for 15 games for basically claiming that everything was corrupt. And then he did that little row back and he said, well, corruption means something different in Spanish, etc., etc. And it's after the whole week in which French football and French media felt that we've got to treat our referees better, we've got to treat our officials better, there's got to be a situation under which they can work, which isn't just intolerable pressure and, you know, really like not even personal criticism, but like, you know, personal threat, really. And it's just that Fonseca did exactly that at the end of that week. I feel that's why he's being made an example of. Not that he shouldn't be punished. Clearly he should be punished. But Lyon are in a really difficult position now because, of course, they've just appointed him. They got rid of Pierre Sarge, not because he's a bad coach, but because he hit a bit of a block and because Fonseca was available. I think it's widely appreciated that, you know, John Textor had a thing for him and he wanted to appoint him for a while to one of his assets. So if they can't shift this ban, do they have to sack him? I think maybe they do. I mean, you can't go until the 30th of November basically without a coach, can you? Because he wouldn't even be allowed back in the dressing room until the 15th of September. It's the reason the ban is slightly longer than initially thought, and we thought before that he might get 7 months, is A, they don't want him to sort of use up ban in summer holidays when there's no game. And B, the reasoning that's been used by the board that took his case up is, well, it's different to a player doing it because he's basically got the position of educator, example setter, so it looks a lot worse.
I completely hear what you're saying about he's a slight victim of timing and circumstance, but I just feel very, very strongly that abuse of referees is a big problem in the game that's getting worse and worse, and fans and to an extent players appear to be getting radicalized. Like we see much more conspiracy theories than before. Like for as long as we've all been watching football, like we've all gone to football games our entire lives, and there's always been people in the crowd who have a go at the referee constantly. Like I went to a game at Watford once, where like the guy behind me was like abusing Jonathan Moss, I think he was, from like the first whistle, like the first decision. There was this guy shouting, "Oh, Moss, you absolute cretin!" I was like, this is really weird. Who goes to a football game at Watford or anyone else thinking, "Today I'm really going to have a go at Jonathan Moss"? But I mean, this is what it's always been this way. But it does feel like it's getting worse, and it's accelerating in a way that is problematic. And I do wonder if social media and the way people with sort of extreme viewpoints egg each other on online is causing a kind of radicalization that we're seeing in the rest of the world to spill over into football. I don't mind the footballing authorities actually deciding no more of this. Like, if you can't behave yourself around referees, then we have to ban you for quite a long time. I think it would be a good thing if football authorities around the world took that stance. The problem, I guess, in this decision is I don't think that's what's happened. I think it's just like Andy was saying, it just came at a time where, again, you've had these absurd allegations by Pablo Longoria. You've had a referee had his tires slashed, basically, outside his house. So there's a real sort of vibe of this needs to stop, and then Paulo Fonseca kind of sticks his foot in it and behaves like this right at that moment.
But where do Lyon go from here, Andy? What hole? How deep is the hole that they're in?
Well, I think the tempting thing, if they need to go and get another coach, bring back Pierre Sage. That's the obvious thing, isn't it? You know, he helped them out of a hole before. It's clear that he's a very good coach. It's clear that the players really like him.
Go back to
have weirder things happened?
Would he prove a sage appointment? Does that work?
I think it has been pointed out, definitely, Lars, that if there was someone more sage on the bench, this wouldn't have happened.
Darren on Instagram, though, asks, I know it's early days, but now that we've seen 2 games from Robin van Persie's Feyenoord, do you think he'll be a success at his boyhood club, Andy?
Well, I think it's not so much the 2-game sample that leaves us in a position where we can't really answer this. It's the fact that he's only had a top job for less than a season at Heerenveen. And look, the results have been like vastly varying as well. So they beat PSV and they lose 9-1 in the same season. They play lots of interesting attacking football, but they're only in the middle of the table. I don't think what he's done is an exceptional job at Heerenveen. It's not a terrible job either. It's exactly the sort of job that you would expect a young coach with potential to do in his first season. I guess the thing is, this isn't any old club inviting him. It's Feyenoord. It was his first club that he came up through the academy of, that he managed the academy of when he retired. He managed the academy team when he retired, and that his son plays for as a pro. So, I mean, this is a decision to appoint him that has been made with heart rather than head, I think. Now, the whole sense when Brian Priske was at Feyenoord is that he didn't get it in terms of what the club was about. Because if you look at Feyenoord, they're like the equivalent of, say, Sporting in Portugal. They're the 3rd biggest of the big 3, and they're a team that relies really heavily on their academy. Now, of course, everyone, when they look at Dutch football, looks at the Ajax academy. But in fact, if you look at previous Dutch World Cup squads and European Championship squads, the amount of players that have come through the Feyenoord academy is unbelievable. You know, it's a less glitzy academy, but it's really important. Van Persie gets that because he came through it and then he helped to oversee some of those young players for a bit. So I think for where they are now, there's an argument that he's the right person to come in because he understands the essence of club. And if they're on a bit of a mini slide and they're looking at a rebuild with those sort of players, then maybe he's the person to do that. But do we know that he's a very good, not even an elite, but a very good coach at this level? No, we don't. We can't know that yet. So it's clear that he's been invited for what and who he is, rather than necessarily what he might. It's clear that he's been invited to this job for who he is rather than what he might be as a coach, which is the issue. I think the other thing to put on the end is the fact that apparently a lot of the coaching staff and people who are working with him at Heerenveen are quite happy to see the back of him because his interpersonal skills are maybe not the best.
That doesn't sound promising. I do always feel that like big name ex players are like the nepo babies of management. They just kind of wander into jobs that logically they should not get. The only thing that brings me some sort of belief, because you can't judge anything on 2 games, it's just not possible, and maybe you can't even judge on the Heerenveen stint because it was pretty short, except as Andy says, he appears to have annoyed some people. The thing that maybe gives me some sense of optimism is he has been in the building before. Like, he has worked there as a youth coach, so the director, the people making the decisions at the club will have met him and seen him work with players, and they have some sort of basis to judge his character and judge what they've not just gone, hey, this is a very famous guy, used to play for the club, this will be fine. Like, at least it's someone they know to some extent, and that gives me, because they wouldn't, like, if he was acting like, if he seemed completely incapable and not appropriate for this kind of job, they would presumably have noticed that when he was at the club earlier. So they wouldn't have brought him in unless they felt there was something there, you would think.
Well, staying in that part of the world, football-wise, Paddy on Discord says in the space of a week, PSV have been knocked out of the KNVB Cup by Go Ahead Eagles. Then they lost to them again a few days later to put them further behind Ajax in the league, and are now effectively out of the Champions League after an embarrassing loss to a team with basically no strikers. Where do Peter Bosz and PSV go from here, Lars?
Well, to triumph, to success, I think, at least according to Peter Bosz, who said, I believe he said after the game, of course I will turn this around, which is, I think he means the general situation more so than the tie itself can probably not be turned around. I don't know, Peter Bosz is a weird one, because we've kind of seen at multiple jobs now that what he is doing as a coach, you will have good moments. Like, he's very attack-minded, he's an idealist, he wants the team to play good football, and there will be moments where that works and where that looks good. But you also have just moments of absolute madness down the other end, and that seems to be a recurring theme. And I wasn't surprised. You can say Arsenal have no strikers, but they were playing a Peter Bosz team, so a team with no strikers meets a team with no defense. Let's see how that goes. Turns out 7-1. I'm being a little bit harsh, but it's happened so many times with Peter Bosz that his teams look completely unhinged defensively. Andy, the notable Olympique Lyonnais enjoyer, Andy, I'm sure will have some thoughts about this, and I think it's pretty weird. But maybe being in charge of one of the big teams in the Dutch league is a logical place for a guy like that to go. I don't know.
Lars, I'm a Peter Bosz enjoyer as long as he's not managing my club. Is the
maybe that's what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we have to say, firstly, he has done an exceptional job at PSV, and a job that I, for one, was not expecting, because you think leopards don't change their spots, particularly when they get into their 60s. Now, that he's gone and won his first title as a coach, I think is phenomenal. They were brilliant last season, and really, we've talked about it before, one of the reasons that Arne Slot stays that extra year at Feyenoord is he says, look at Ajax, they're in a mess. I can win the league again. I can win the league for a second season in a row at Feyenoord, which would have been an amazing achievement. And he would have done because the season that they gave last season, Feyenoord wins the league in most seasons. But they didn't, because PSV were absolutely phenomenal. And Bosz is behind that. They played fearless football because that's what he does. But funnily enough, I would compare not to what's happening to them at the moment, not so much to one of his previous patterns of behaviour, but the end of Erik ten Hag at Ajax. Now, it's interesting because in the second half, and it's something that was rarely addressed when he turned up at Manchester United, Ten Hag, but defensively, in his last season at Ajax, Ten Hag's team absolutely fall to bits defensively. They start leaking goals left and right. And what should be a procession to the title actually becomes reasonably close in the end. Now, clearly, that's not the same situation that Peter Bosz is in, because, as Paddy says, it looks like they're not going to win the league. It looks like a pretty ordinary rebuilding Ajax team are going to win the league. They're 8 points in front, which, if you'd have said that was going to happen 2 months ago, you would have looked at me and said, you're out of your mind. There's like no possible way that's going to happen. And even for Ajax to make it close with PSV, it's going to take a Herculean effort. So I think you've got to look. The numbers are unavoidable, because since the start of this calendar year, their form has fallen off a cliff, largely because they've chucked points with their bad defending. They've conceded over 2 goals a game for this season and for this calendar year, and that was the case even before they conceded these 7 to Arsenal. So it's a huge problem, and I guess the problem is, and if we go back to what Bosz is, the problem is when he digs himself a hole, he keeps digging. You know, there's the famous quote, of course, and I always go back to it from when he was at Dortmund. Plan B is to make Plan A work better. And that's the issue. And he's not going to change in that sense.
It tickles me every time, that quote.
me too. I love it. That's why I repeat it so often.
Don't worry.
But Lars, this is why he's a great coach, I think, to create an exciting team and to create exciting principles of the game and to create football that you want to watch. He's not really the coach to dig you out of a crisis or dig himself out of a crisis.
No, I mean, you say that is your favorite Peter Bosz quote. I mean, my favorite one is when he was at Lyon and things were going badly and they've asked him what he was going to do. I think it was an international break, and he said he was going to drink a lot of alcohol, which I think is, fair enough. Gotta deal with this stuff somehow. Yeah. And Andy's given a much more serious answer than me, and God bless him for it. What I would say, if I'm being slightly more serious for a second, looking at stats from our friends at FOTMob, actually on the XG, PSV actually should be top of the league. Like on the expected points, which is if every game had gone according to the XG in that game, PSV would actually be top, which suggests that even though, as Andy says, they're going to get beaten to the title by a not brilliant Ajax, that he has been a little bit unfortunate. And maybe, as much fun as it is, because he has such a track record of his teams looking unhinged and bad defensively, it's funny to make fun of him after the 7-1 to Arsenal, but there's probably a limit to what Dutch teams can do in Europe, and you come up against a strong, powerful Premier League team, injuries or no, and you are a very attack-minded team domestically, and maybe you have a slightly bad day to begin with, and Arsenal should have had a player sent off, and Perisic hit the post, and blah blah blah. Yeah, that kind of accident it can happen. Whereas really domestically, team actually not that bad. So maybe we shouldn't make fun of Peter Bosz. Maybe he should just be there and go again next year, and maybe it'll be fine.
Chris on YouTube asks, after extending Wolfsburg's league unbeaten stretch to 6 games with a win at Bremen at the weekend, how much credit does Ralph Hasenhüttl deserve for the work he's done there?
Yeah, good bit, I think. He took them over in a difficult position where they could have found themselves sucked into a relegation fight. And he's sort of rebuilt, and he's rebuilt with resources that are not big compared to previous Wolfsburg managers.
He should be used to that by now, I'd have thought.
I suppose, from Southampton, although it seems a really long time ago since he had all the riches of Leipzig, doesn't it? Now, Wolfsburg, I guess, in a way, were a sort of proto-Leipzig, really, and, they've been able to spend mad money in the past. Not so much the case now. They have to recruit sensibly, and he's created a team that get results and that are good to watch. I think particularly when you look at some of the absences that he's faced, and I'm thinking particularly Lucas Mecha. If you'd have said at the start of the season that Lucas Mecha is going to start one Bundesliga game, you think, okay, well, Wolfsburg aren't going anywhere here, have they? And they've managed to lean on other things. They've managed to create a system that scores goals. Mohamed Amour has been brilliant. I think he will maybe be their next big sale. He's a scorer and creator as well. And they've done it by playing, open, fun to watch football. I think if you look at their goal scoring. They're in the top 4 in the league in terms of goal scoring teams. Only, I think, Bayern, Leverkusen, maybe Frankfurt because of Marmouche are in front of them. The only thing I would say is I don't think it's the strongest Bundesliga ever this season. There's an opportunity for them to go and get something in terms of European places because Stuttgart have struggled with the balance. They've done pretty well in the circumstances, but they have struggled with the balance of Champions League and Bundesliga. Dortmund are Dortmund. Leipzig have been well off it for a lot of this season as well. And Eintracht Frankfurt, I think, are going to fall a couple of places because of losing Marmouche. So I think if they can keep this consistency going that they've shown in the last month or two, then there's an opportunity for Wolfsburg to go and really get something. And when I say get something, they won't do it through defending because they're just not good enough at the back. They'll do it through actually going and winning games.
I think with Hasenhüttl, what I just want to say is that his career trajectory is really interesting because we forget that he was pretty, like, pre-Southampton, really highly rated. Like, he got Ingolstadt promoted and kind of established them in the Bundesliga, or at least, finished the mid-table after getting promoted, and finished second in the league with Leipzig when they were at a much earlier stage of their development and just kind of establishing themselves in the Bundesliga. And him going to Southampton was a really sort of, wow, okay. It was, in my mind, an example of the extraordinary pulling power of the Premier League. First of all, the money that you can make there, but also the fact that it puts you in the spotlight in terms of getting even bigger jobs in a way that maybe being the coach of a lower half team in England actually puts you more in the shop window than being the coach of a European challenger in the Bundesliga. We see this with Oliver Glasner deciding to go to Crystal Palace. It's odd seeing guys with these sort of CVs go to clubs in the bottom half of the Premier League, but that's the pulling power of the Premier League. But the thing is, since it went initially quite well at Southampton, but then not well enough for the bigger teams to take an interest in Hasenhüttl, he's kind of petered out a bit, and this left him leaving Southampton in 2022. And yeah, I guess it put his career in a slightly odd place. And the next step then is that you take a mid-table team in Germany, and we shouldn't be surprised that he's doing well there because everything we've seen from him suggests that he's actually a really good coach.
This from Mo Bean on Instagram. After just one win in their last 9, can Parma pick up enough results to avoid relegation this season? I mean, this is shocking that Parma, as a team, once upon a time, a powerhouse of, I would have thought, European football, getting into European Cup finals and that kind of thing, but now facing relegation.
Yeah, and they're a long way from that.
Of course.
It has to be said, of course, the circumstances have changed a lot in the last 20 to 25 years. I would edge towards yes, because I do think they've got a better squad than some of the others down there. And all I would say is this season, I don't think there are as many no-hopers as there might seem to be at initial glance. When you look at a league table and you think, yeah, there's a lot of rubbish at the bottom there this season. I think people will have looked at the bottom of Serie A and said that to themselves earlier points in this season. But I think we've seen the last couple of months, Lecce can get results. Empoli, who are currently in the bottom 3, just below Parma, can get results. Of course, they knocked Juventus out of the cup and got into the cup semi-finals for the first time in their over 100-year history. So I don't think there are as many turkeys there at the bottom, which makes it dangerous for Parma. The other thing that makes it dangerous for them is you look at their key players, the players who are going to get them goals, Boni and Dennis Mann from midfield. They had a great start to the season. Of course, they beat Milan in game week 2, and it's dried up a little bit since then. Unless those guys start firing again, they've got absolutely no chance. I guess the great unknown, Lars, is the coach, and I guess it takes us back to Robin van Persie. And they've got a big name who's just come in Christian Kivu, who's done pretty good work with age group sides at Inter, of course, a club that he played for with great distinction. But we just don't know what you can do at this level, do we?
No, not at all. And I think that's a risky thing to do when you're down that end of the table. I think experience for experience. Having already complained about the Nepo babies, I'm going to contradict myself a little bit and say that experience for experience's sake doesn't always have to be good. Like, just because a coach has had many jobs doesn't automatically make him good. But I do think when it comes to relegation battles, there's a thing to be said for having done this stuff before and having some experience with the mental processes that players go through and what it takes to lift a club after losing many games. I think Kivu will have spent a lot of his career playing for very good clubs and winning most weeks. I always think players who have that background, it can shock them a little bit what it's like to actually go into most games knowing that the opponent has better players than you. I think the very difficult psychological setting can be a challenge. But I lean again on our good friends at FotMob, where I'm looking at the XG table for Serie A, where Parma are not bottom, they're 14th. Which suggests that actually, even though their form has nosedived a little bit, the squad has got enough to it to get results in this league, and I think they can get out of it.
This question from Patrick on Instagram is going to allow you both to freestyle your way into an answer, to take us on that journey that you lot have been on, going across Europe, on the road, as it were, because Patrick asked, after your jolly, when he says their jolly, means you two, Lars and Andy, after their jolly in Istanbul last month, yes, noted, didn't bring home any Turkish delight, but nevertheless, after their jolly in Istanbul last month, where would Andy and Lars like to go next on their European tour?
When you taking me to Bodo Glimt?
Oh yeah,
in the winter. Take him there in the winter, mate. That'll teach him.
Yeah, absolutely right. When it's dark all
you
day
are bitter
and it's
about
snowy.
This Turkish delight thing, aren't you?
Yeah, of course I am.
We ate it all, Dotun, and we enjoyed it.
You're going to be able to eat lutefisk in Bodo Glimt, aren't you?
Get some lutefisk.
Yeah.
Well, for me, there's a clear answer to this, which is, I've already done a huge sort of bucket list thing this year, going to Istanbul, watching football with Andy Brassel. It's an incredible experience. Second on the list there, clearly, still travelling with Andy, it's got to be Lisbon. It's got to be going to Lisbon to watch football with Andy Brassel in Lisbon and also eat a ton of food. It's the logical next step for me. We got to make it happen.
A little bit too much salt for me in terms of Portuguese food, but great suggestion, Lisboa.
When you're talking about salted fish, clearly you want to move forward to Game of the Week. You just go for it.
No, not at all. But it's now time for our Game of the Week, brought to you by FotMob. And each week our experts recommend a game for you to watch at the weekend. And just as importantly, they also suggest the food we should be having with it. What, no meat? Lars, what are you going for this week in terms of your Game of the Week?
Yeah, I'm going to follow in David's footsteps from last week and heading to Serie A, because I think for me the Sunday game between Juventus and Atalanta is super interesting for a number of reasons, but for only just looking at where they are on the table, like this looks still like it's likely to be a two-horse race between Inter and Napoli, but Atalanta they're just 2 points behind Napoli. Juventus are just 5 points behind Napoli. There's enough games left in this season, especially with both Inter and Napoli dropping some points here and there, that this could be there could be an additional horse. I don't know enough about horse racing to know what that is called when another horse turns up towards the end. Is there a word for that? I don't know it, but certainly an additional Italian horse could turn up, and just an odd situation for Atalanta now, with Gasperini coming out publicly and saying he's not going to renew his contract, so this is going to be his last season there. Could they make an incredible title push in his last sort of couple of months at the club, what seems to be the last couple of months at the club, and Juventus, who I've kind of slagged off, I think, on my last appearance on OTC a couple of weeks ago, but for just being kind of dull. They have started winning games. Like they've been winning games and just kind of clawing their way back up there, giving Thiago Motta some much needed respite from all the criticism. So both teams in an interesting space and an interesting spot, I think, now. And whoever wins this, I think, suddenly has a shout at in getting involved in the title race. So that's an exciting one for me.
That's Sunday at 7:45, and according to FotMob, Juventus have kept the most clean sheets in Serie A this season, 14. Haven't lost to Atalanta in their last 8 meetings. However, And there is always a however. Atalanta's Charles de Ketelaere is ranked second in big chances created in Serie A.
Go on, Charles.
Yeah, there's got to be goals in that.
And Atalanta also second in FootMob's XG table, who listeners will notice I'm quite keen on. I've been using that a lot this week, but it's a big fan of it. Big fan of it. Food pairing. I've just spent 3 weeks in Southeast Asia and had a tremendous time, but now I'm back in colder climates. So I think warming food is the name of the game. So I think I'm going to cook a pasta dish for this with like a creamy sauce with some porcini mushrooms and some pancetta. Get the pancetta and the mushrooms and make a creamy sauce for the tagliatelle or something, and just make a very Italian-y but very warming and hearty dish for myself this weekend after surviving entirely on a diet of tom yum and seafood for the last 3 weeks. I need something else now.
What beautiful cultural crossover. And he snacked the pancetta in there to make it more Serie A friendly. I mean, that's expert. We can tell he's been doing this for a while.
And so have you, Andy. What would your game of the week recommendation be in that case?
Well, mine's going to be slightly earlier on Sunday. It's going to be Getafe versus Atletico Madrid. Now, look, Atletico never lose to Getafe, but I think there are two buts here. Firstly, the fact that Atletico are in the middle of these two huge games in the Champions League against Real Madrid.
Distraction.
I mean, so they've got to keep their eye on the ball to keep their title challenge up. And on one hand, they don't have to travel far, of course, because Getafe on the outskirts of Madrid. But I think that the issue here is, firstly, that Getafe were really good at the start of 2025. Now, they've just lost 2 successive games. They've lost to Betis and Leganés. But before that, they were absolutely flying, playing really well, getting some great results. The other thing is, if you look at these sort of almost derbies, these lesser Madrid derbies, this is something that tripped up Atletico earlier in the season as well. Because if you go back, when they had that incredible run of like 15 successive wins, and then they slip up in January, who is it who does them? Leganés, who did over Getafe last week. So this is exactly, I think, despite what precedent of result tells us, I think at this time in this season, this is exactly the place that Atletico could slip up. All right, don't expect the ball to be in play too much. Maybe Atletico's bench will make the difference, but I think it's going to be really interesting finding out. What we're going to do is, because Lars has got such an Italian feast saved for us, only less than 4 hours later in the evening, because this is Sunday at 4 p.m. between Getafe and Atletico. You're going to have to, as when you go to the match in Madrid, get yourself a nice bocadillo just to tide you over.
Oh, sorry, what's that?
It's a sandwich. You can have tortilla de patatas in there, so you can have a potato tortilla, or you can have jamon if you're not vegetarian.
So it's a sandwich. I mean,
but it's
Lars went
no,
through all of that.
No. This is a culturally important sandwich, and I want you to acknowledge that. And it always comes in foil for freshness.
Oh, acknowledged. And by the way, and I know you want to come off the back of this and say a word or two, Lars, but let me just say that FOTMob confirmed what Andy said. That Atletico Madrid never lose to Getafe, and they haven't lost to them in their last 29 meetings, despite Andy's butts.
But even if they take a point off them, that'll be really tough on Atletico.
Yeah,
so
fair point, Lars.
Well, I just want to interject that in their 26 games in the league so far this season, Getafe have received 76 yellow cards. They are the yellow card kings of La Liga.
Follow our Games of the Week recommendations and many more from across Europe and beyond with FOTMob. FOTMob is the best place to check the latest scores and in-depth stats from all the football on the continent. And you can download the free FOTMob app right now and get all the latest analysis at your fingertips in time for the weekend. Thank you for listening to Ask OTC, and if you'd like to ask a question, you can contact us at any time at Radio Dotun, at Andy Brassel, and at Lars Severston, or at OTC Pod, and you can email us otc@footballramble.com.